Hi, everyone. Hello. Hello, and thank you for coming to the Menil collection tonight. I'm so happy to see you all here. Hopefully everybody survived the cold snap and you're happy to be back out in some decent weather. My name is Mary Magsman. I'm the Public Programs Manager here, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to the Artist Talk with Nari Ward. We'd first like to thank the Cockrell Family Fund for their support of this program series. Our next Artist Talk is on April 4th with Nancy Grossman. Also upcoming on February 1st, the renowned British painter Jenny Saville will be here to talk on the work of Cy Twombly as part of the Marion Barthelme Lecture Series. I ask that you please silence your cell phones now. And tonight we have the privilege of welcoming Nari Ward. Ward, born in Jamaica, is now based in New York City. His work demonstrates an extraordinary ability for blending diverse materials and discovered objects in the construction of his compelling narratives. Ward uses his palette, which includes a broad spectrum of everyday items like ladders, baby strollers, carpets, bottles, shoelaces, to transform these discarded materials into work that delves into the complexities surrounding race, poverty, and consumer culture. For Ward, the symbolic power of repurposed materials forcefully ignites this dialogue. Throughout his career, he has received numerous accolades, including an NEA and Rome Prize, and he's exhibited in prestigious institutions globally, including our own CAM here in Houston. Tonight, we are also celebrating a new acquisition in the museum's collection by Ward. His monumental work, Say Can You See, is currently on view in the exhibition Longing, Grief, and Spirituality, Art Since 1980, curated by Michelle White. We'd like to thank Jeffrey Deitch and Michael Zilka for making this gift possible. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to Nari Ward.
Great, thank you guys. It's a real pleasure to be here. And I was trying to get away from, the reason Michelle sort of scheduled my time to be here was I was trying to escape the cold of New York and ended up coming into this. But nevertheless, I'm really excited about the show, and I really wanted to think about a presentation that dealt with the issues that are in the show right now, which is something that I've been, this notion of spirituality, activism, material transformation. I think all of these things are sort of the through line in my work. And I guess it's also, this is a kind of excuse for me to tell stories. I like telling stories. So forgive a little bit of the ramblings that you're going to be having to navigate. I wanted to start from the beginning. I want to start before I was an artist. And before I was an artist, I was actually a night watchman at Macy's. and I actually was the dog patrol, right? So this is what was really strange. So when Macy's, they deposit money during the day, and at night they collect the money. So I didn't even realize, but they sent me around before they sent the armed guards to collect the money, right? So I would go with these dogs. But it was like, I worked there for it might have been around 4 years. And a lot of walking around the empty store, the night, it was something really that I reflect on now in terms of even my engagement with consumer culture, with space, with mystery. So it was kind of, for me now, reflecting on it, and I also did a lot of sleeping, to be quite honest. I was able to rest and even do my work for the next day, my artwork. So it was a good job to have as an artist. And I wanted to start with this project. While I was an artist in residence at the Student Museum, there's across the street from my studio that I had on 125th Street was a firehouse. And I remember going to the firemen and asking them if they had any fire hose, because I was really intrigued with this material, specifically because it talked about this notion of rejuvenation, like two elemental materials, fire and water. And also the fact that it was an industrial material, and I think my generation kind of reflected on the minimalist, this kind of use of industrial material as a kind of romantic, maybe even post-minimalist expectation. And so I wanted to engage that material, and the fireman is nice enough to tell me that, all of their broken hoses goes to this one place in Queens called the hose room. And I was like, oh, great, the hose room, let me go to the hose room. So I went to the hose room, and this is back in the 80s, So I went, and they were really happy to see me. They were happy that an artist was interested in the material. And this is pre-eBay, so they really didn't have any use for this material, and they were, in some ways, almost begrudgingly kept it, because the sanitation department didn't want it either. So they were like, take as much material as you want. So I loaded up my van and had all of this fire hose. So what I really wanted to do with it was, I was finding all these empty, in these empty lots in Harlem, I was finding all these materials, and I kind of want to reflect on that too. It wasn't garbage, right? Because a lot of the materials that were calling me were usually found in lots where people may have been a burned down building, or somebody's personal items ended up there. So it wasn't like on the sidewalk waiting to be picked up. So I think in that way, it probably triggered more empathy on my part to sort of reflect on how this thing got here and what it meant for its original owner. And so I wanted to find a kind of special space for these things that I was collecting. And so I started burning the boxes. Right. So what I did was I got these cardboard boxes and screwed them together with this fire hose, and then burned out the cardboard. So it became this kind of empty vessel for these elements that I was collecting. And then I sort of decided I needed a central element for this piece. So this became like the central element. This is basically the skin of the fire hose. So I would take off the outer layer and use this sort of ring the material. And I like that it kind of kept the energy of the ringing. There's a kind of visceral, corporeal kind of element engaged with it. For me, it referenced the body in a lot of ways. And so this kind of became the central element of this piece called Exodus. It's like all these, like the notion that these were going somewhere. There's maybe a sort of hopeful journey that these objects are on. So I think that's the other thing. You create these stories. I create these stories. It starts out for me a kind of origin of what I want it to do, but ultimately you want it to engage the imagination of the viewer. And I think that a part of what I navigate as a contemporary artist is the history and legacy of the art world, right? The sort of tradition of sculpture, as well as my community, like what I see on the street. And I think that street life and that contemporary art life is what I'm excited about engaging with, merging, and even the contradictions of those things, for me, is really exciting. So the other piece I wanted to talk about was this piece called Savior. I did this when I was an artist in residence. Well, it was a project called Quieting the Land that Franz Moran, curator, put together. And the premise was that contemporary artists would go and live and work with the Shakers, right? So there still is a Shaker community in Sabbath Day Lake, Maine. Now they're down to 2. Back when we were doing this residency, there were 8. And so what it was we would go there and basically work for them, do chores with them, and then and have meals with them, and of course, socialize, talk about their ideas and things of that nature. So one thing that came, a lot of things came from that, but one thing that this piece, what triggered this piece was one of the Brother Arnold talked about the nature of, why the Shaker chairs are so special. And it was, to be honest, it's a little bit hokey, but he kind of a little bit granola, but it still stayed with me, right? Because he said that, they make their Shaker chairs as if an angel was to sit in it. And sure, great, so, but it kind of, as much as it was sort of hokey in a way, it sort of stayed with me. And I thought about this idea of like faith and what that meant. And the idea, faith not of being something that is passive but active, and how a person's agency can play out in this notion of faith. So I wanted to make a chair that a sort of an entity, I don't want to say angel, an entity, a spirit, an energy could occupy. But the part of it for me from the very beginning was that I would activate it, right? And so I knew I wanted to build this thing, and what it is it's actually, you see a chair, it's a fence, it's wheel, it's clocks, it's earth, springs, it's a shopping cart, and I knew I wanted to activate it. And this was kind of important, and in some ways it's this idea of sculpture that isn't about the pedestal, right? It's about some kind of ceremony, was always sort of back in my formative ideas around the object making, right? So this piece, I decided I wanted to push from my studio, which is on 125th Street, like I mentioned, to the Abyssinian Baptist Church. I grew up as a Baptist, even though I'm not a practicing, not really into the faith as much. But I grew up in that, around those ideologies of the Christian faith. And I wanted to figure out a way, especially after coming from the Shakers, to tie the idea of a kind of creative journey with a devotional journey, right? So this, the notion that I would push this to the Abyssinian Baptist Church sort of made sense. And so what you see is, I'm going to just play a little bit of video of me. So the left one is me going to the church, and the right is me coming back from the church. I made sure I had my Sunday finery on, because I didn't want to, I guess I didn't want to be confused with being a homeless person, right? Because, but nobody in this, New York is like that. People, I rarely got any heads were turned. It's like, sure, normal day in New York. So I was fortunate to have my good friend Marcel Odenbach, a German videographer, in town to do the documentation. So this was actually my first ever performance. I was really exhilarated getting it, doing it. And so I won't, like I said, I'm gonna play the whole thing, but what I did is I took this object to the church, and then on the side, I had this powder. This is pre-LeBron James, by the way. I had a kind of baby powder, and I just kind of wiped my hands with the baby. You can see that small little white container there to the left, on the left, what is your left screen. And nobody really said anything. I mean, I think one German tourist came up to me when I got to the church and asked what I was doing, and I just, said that I was doing an artwork, and she left me alone. Yeah, and those the recycle bag has 3 clocks, three clocks were in it. This might be a little misleading notion of New York. It just so happened, I remember now why there were so many police officers. There was some issue that happened to one of the mosques on 125th Street, so that's why there were that many police officers. Anyway, okay, so I wanted to keep moving on. Yeah, so that was the first performance. And then I decided I wanted to do another street performance. So this one is called Crusaders. This was actually a kind of winged shopping cart. And it's a shopping cart that I could literally go inside of. So this was done, it was about the time that we'd invaded Iraq. And there was this, suspicion that we went there for the oil. Anyway, and I think, for me, it was always about not being a political artist. It was me trying to deal with the political anxiety of the moment, and maybe even a kind of imaginary commentary on what's transpiring. So what's going on here is it's actually bitumen, right? It's all petroleum-based material. So it's plastic wings. There's a kind of plastic plexiglass wings. There are gasoline cans. There's a small chandelier at the bottom, and then there's actually a trophy that's the handle for the vehicle. So like I said, I kind of go inside of it. And I'll play a little bit of the journey. So this is one where I went from my studio, and at that time I moved my studio, but it was from my studio to the mobile gas station on 145th Street. And I was on 141st, so it's about a 4-block walk. Yeah, I kind of dressed like an aviator of sort. I really was, but this is actually what I was wearing. It was a cold day, so it was normal. There's also a little globe in the front that I do a performance with when I get to the gas pump. There's a small camera in the front of the globe, and then a former student of mine, Zachary Fabry, really good artist. He's doing the video documentation for me. So it's edited down. This is probably about a 20-minute journey, but you don't worry. It's not. It's been edited down. That was a really great sort of serendipitous moment where what you're hearing is jackhammer doing some road work. So this is where you're never sure. One of the great things about doing things in public, you're opening up chance, right? You're not sure what's going to happen. So I wasn't sure if anybody, one of the gas station attendant would come out and stop me, but nobody, they stayed away, which was good. So I kind of had the oil, a little oil, and I put it in this goblet, this trophy goblet, and basically kind of washed my hands with it. I think I was thinking a lot about anxiety and this idea of cleansing. So I'm trying to spin the globe, and it's sort of covered with tar, so it's hard to spin it initially. Yeah, so that's pretty much, then it's basically me going back to the studio with the piece. So I wanted to just pick up on this idea of this ceremonializing of the object. And this piece kind of came out of this piece called Iron Heavens. It started out sort of being a commentary about violence. So what I did was I had these baseball bats, and I scorched them, and then I tried to heal them by using what would be like sterilized cotton. So what I did was I had these sterilized cotton that I would dip in sugar and iron the edges, so you can kind of see that in this detail here. And then I would nail them onto this scorched cotton, a scorched bat rather. So these pendants are really important for me because I dipped them in this material. It's kind of a neighborhood material. It was called tropical fantasy soda, right? And it came in these very bright colors, right, to attract young kids to it, and it's super sweet. And so I used the the white version for this. So you can't see it now, but there's a lot of red, white, and blue in that section of the bats, and over time that's gone away. But that was kind of the premise for it. So it's talking about this notion of violence and this idea of healing in dialogue. And then the background, I'm just going to go back for a second, was really these oven pans that I was collecting. And I really liked the fact that the oven pans had this kind of star galaxy pattern. And I remember the story of my grade school teacher talking about, you know, the light from the star. By the time that light gets to us here at Earth, that star no longer exists. So the stars have always, you know, it takes that long for the light to get here that they're already burned out. So stars for me have always had this element of wonderment, but also sense of loss connected with it. And so it felt like the right combination for this work to sort of have. And that became Iron Heavens. So I guess doing this piece also put me on this trajectory of mining my flag works. So I wanted to show this piece called Glory. It's a tanning bed that you can tan the American flag on your body. it's made from oven pan, or rather, it's made from oil barrels. So what kind of got me, and what got me started on this, it's kind of these weird moments of reflection. I remember looking at this, I found this book on tanning beds, and I realized that 90% of the tanning beds have names of like so-called third world countries, right? You know, sort of equatorial countries. And I remember one that was called Montego Bay, and being that I was from Jamaica, it really resonated. And so I always saw a tanning bed as a so-called first world entity, equipment. You don't go to any of these tropical land, countries and find a tanning salon. So I was really intrigued with this idea of putting the American flag on your body. It actually would work. I had my assistant lay in there for a good hour, and you can get the marks on your body. So it does work. So while I was doing this piece, and it has a sound element to it, but that didn't come until later, because while I was doing it, the work started to get really morbid, and I didn't want that. I didn't want that it to reside in a kind of morbid space. I was intrigued with using the flag as a symbol, and I thought it's too easy to want to be that, to have the criticality go into that direction. So I remember I was on this just by chance. These these kind of serendipitous moments are really important. We were invited. My family was invited to this summer kind of, I guess we call it vacation or residency, with this philanthropic collector named Kippy Stroud, really amazing collector, Kippy. And she has this Camp Kippy that she invites artists and curators to come and spend the summer. So she'll have you stay in a house, like here, like a little bit like here. And I remember we're in this house, and I'm, at the time I was working on this piece, and my son pushed the player on the CD player. And I guess the person who was there before had parrots. So there was a soundtrack that was how to teach your parrot English. And I thought we just started cracking up, and I was like, that was like the perfect element for this piece. So we'll listen to it a little bit. And it even had, sequences.
Come on over here. Hello, baby. I love you.
Yes, so I couldn't have made that up. So it was like perfect sort of humor, necessary humor for the piece. I just wanted to show the back. So it's made out of oil barrels and camera equipment and computer parts. Okay, so within the idea of mining these traditions, so why the flag, right? Like I'm showing the Chinese flag, but why was I thinking about the flag as a kind of reference to engage with? And I think for me, it was just this very powerful nationalistic symbol that is super complicated, right? The way America is complicated. And I just felt like it was, because of that, it was important to, and maybe even difficult to have a dialogue with. And there's a whole, I felt like I wanted to be part of the lineage of artists who worked with the flag, like Jasper Johns, Faith Rangold, David Hammonds, so many, that I just felt like I wanted to figure out my place within that conversation as well. So this piece was kind of important. This Chinese flag. So I was doing a project in Beijing, and it was actually I was working on another work that required a lot of shoes. And to get the shoes, we needed to take off these shoelaces. And at the time, they asked me, one of the artists couldn't get there, couldn't get, they had issues of getting to China. So they had this massive wall, probably like the size of that wall there. And they said, can you think of any works that we can do real quick? Because we have like 3 days before the opening. And I had this pile of shoelaces. And I really wanted to think about how to engage with these really charged symbols. So I wanted to take on the Chinese flag. So when I was doing my research for the flag, I realized that there was, for the Chinese flag, there was a very distinct coding for the flag. And the actual position of the stars meant something. So that I was really intrigued with the peasantry, which is the one at the very bottom, right? So this is something from the internet. I didn't make this all up. This is something I got from the internet. So this yellow representing the yellow Chinese race. Yes, really. I didn't. That's just from. I lifted that straight off the internet. But what I was intrigued with, and I actually didn't even realize until doing this presentation, that the national bourgeoisie also has pretty much the same slant of the flag of the star. So I decided to take on the peasantry. And so this became the piece, Crying Form, Rising Symbol. And I really liked how it activated something pretty stagnant, right, the star. But the way it lifted it up, almost like a drawing, just like this thing kind of flying off and rising up. And so this approach to working with line and image sort of led me to a whole body of work using shoelaces. And I was intrigued with the shoelace as a kind of starting point, right? It's something that we're all very familiar with, and how it could then be transformed and add different levels of meaning to it. So the next project I did with that was this project, We the People. I really wanted to take on a text that everybody sort of knew, a little bit like the flag, you sort of know it, and how to sort of slow down the read of it so that there are other moments to consider within your experience with the sort of new transcription of it. So I really needed it to be big to sort of relate to the body, and so it sort of took that on. And I was intrigued with the fact that I think a lot of people know of this term, but they don't really consider what it might mean. You know? So again, slowing it down visually, but also slowing it down in terms of creating a dialogue for referencing and thinking about what it might even mean. What I also liked about this is there are moments where the piece becomes very abstract. If you're on the side, you can really, it's almost not legible. So depending on your relationship to it, it really changes. And I wanted to just show this one, which is sort of, I think, apropos at the moment. It's called Lazarus. It's a kind of shoelace piece from Emma Lazarus's poem. This is a poem that she wrote to help fund the building of the base of the Statue of Liberty. I wanted to take that on also because the complication, I love problems. I love things that don't really, they don't really sit in one space. The mythology sort of collapses sometimes. And I love that, in some ways this is about a kind of immigrant narrative, but it's also about slavery, right? Because the Statue of Liberty initially was meant to be celebrating the emancipation of the enslaved people in America. Then they decided that it might be better funding it to have it become about immigrants. So I really wanted this to sort of to do this piece. I also like the fact that Lazarus, this notion of, I'm into the, again, I didn't grow up, I'm not biblical, but I did grow up with Bible stories. So Lazarus in the Bible is this figure who rises from the dead. So I'd like to tie the playing with the author, Emma Lazarus, but also the notion of a kind of transformation. And so I started doing these texts that directly deal with this idea of resistance or protest. And so this one is quite different, but I wanted to show it. And it's from a Bob Dylan song, Blowing in the Wind. And basically, it's a song that talks about, you know, how it was a song that was sung during the Civil Rights era, but it also talks about power, like how difficult it is to grasp power. So this has kind of brought me the shoelace piece. There's quite a few, and actually one now that's up where is it? This the museum close by, the Fine Arts Museum. So it's an important piece, that piece, because it's coming back to Claude McKay. "If We Must Die" is the name of the piece. And Claude McKay, in addition to a Jamaican poet, he wrote this amazing poem about resistance, right? And it basically is talking about, and this is happening, he wrote this in, I think it might have been the 30s. This is the time when there was just a proliferation of lynching and sort of white terrorism across the country. And so it was in direct dialogue and you know, resistance to this this element. And so he basically is just talking about, in that piece, it's talking about, you know, fighting to the end. Oh, I wanted to bring this guy in. So while I was an artist in residence at the Student Museum, this was kind of the local folk artist, Franco the Great. And you can kind of go on 125th Street and still see his gates. There's a lot of articles on Franco. He's actually still alive. I was looking to research him, and he's like 96 years old now. Young man, still a young man. So he would do all these gates along the Harlem corridor. And what was really interesting was, you know, this is the height of graffiti, right? Graffiti art. But none of the young kids would spray over his gates. So a lot of the store owners saw that, and they would hire him to keep painting on the gates. So he had a whole, exhibition space. So, you know, I would go to the Studio Museum. I'd always see Franco's work, and I'd see Franco because he was always out there peddling his work to the tourists, mostly. And I really wanted to do a collaboration with him. I was trying to figure out what we could do. And so I went on his very good, actually really interesting website. If you ever go, it's got a really developed website. And I saw this little blurb. So I didn't know this, but Franco used to be a magician, right? He's from Panama. He used to be a magician. He decided to be an artist. And he has this you can see only a magician would come up with this idea that you could get the ashes of your loved ones who have passed, and he would paint a portrait of them and memorialize them. And I was fascinated by this, you know. So I decided I wanted to ask Franco if he could do that with objects. And I really I wanted to burn an American flag and bring it back, right? Like kind of recreate it. And I was anxious about asking him about this, but so I got a chance to meet him. And he happened to be a veteran. So when I had to really explain to him why I wanted to burn the flag and what it meant. And so why I wanted to burn the flag was that, you know, normally the burning of a flag is about resistance or anger. And I was intrigued with using that gesture as a gesture of like regeneration, of rebirth. And so I said, you know, if I brought you the American flag ash, would you paint it? And, you know, we would sort of revitalize it or re-represent it. And so he was down. Franco was really excited about it. So I got it. But then when I got it, it was just like a flag, right? Just like gray flag. So I realized that I had to put my hand back into it. So the entire form and framing of it became me about like giving life to this material in this translation. So that's the Great Reburn, it was called. So I was really pleased with how this kind of evolved with my collaboration with Franco. So this piece, this is going to get me in hot water here, especially being at the Menil. But this is, I finally got a chance to go and see the Rothko Chapel, and it's an amazing, amazing experience. But I remember what triggered this piece was I went to a Rothko show at Pace. You know, these big galleries do this. It's kind of a promotion to do these historic presentation of artists. And it was kind of interesting, but it's also disconcerting because I was trying to have a moment with the work, and then, you know, you're at Pace, and it's the marketplace, and the guards are right there watching you. And I was a little bit perturbed, like, what does it mean to try to get into that spiritual space within the context of the marketplace? And I was thinking, well, does it have to be oppositional? Can that idea of the marketplace be brought into the spiritual space that we sometimes can compartmentalize in our heads to sort of figure out how to get a kind of internal space? So it sort of led me on this. So what I did was I started, and it's a piece I want to go back into because it's really exciting to do. It was exhilarating to do. So I was able to get money and get a laser cutter. And you know, you look at a dollar bill or a $20 bill, whatever, there's always that edge on the very tip that that's just the excess. So I was able to use the laser cutter and get that excess back and take it off. And the bill still functioned. Nobody knew it was missing, right? The machines, it still worked in the machines, everything. So I was really excited about the fact that I could use this material that came from this bill, this denomination, right? And I love the word denomination, right? Like, denomination is about money, but non-denominational. It's also about religion in a way too, right? So I was really intrigued with bringing money into this spiritual space. So I started doing these pieces. No, so they actually get the title from the cash register drawer. So I want to just show you what is in the middle there. And you can kind of see the bills on the edge, or the edges of the bills there. So it wasn't cynical. You know, it wasn't a cynical thing. I really wanted these to be actors in a kind of activist frame. So what I decided to do is that a percentage of the sale of this work goes to an organization called Housing Works. So for me, it was also like using that the market to in a way that was more about helping. I want to just show this other piece also. There's another one. This one is called National. Again, the name is coming from the cash register draw that's selected. That's something I'm really intrigued with trying to figure out. Like, one of the other projects that I did that I was really happy with is a smile collecting project in Harlem. It started in Harlem. So what I did was I would go around and collect smiles. Basically, it was cans with a mirror inside, and have people smile in it, and then seal the can. And then the can was sold in the neighborhood to benefit the Museum of Storytelling. So this is something I did in Harlem a while back. But the idea that these elements could then go back into funding something within the neighborhood or within an organization was really intriguing for me. As being part of the work, not just as a kind of side project. So I wanted to show this image because this triggered a lot. I talked about the firehouse across the street from me. So I remember they were renovating the firehouse, and for about a year, they had the fire truck in a cage. And I was really intrigued with this. I would see it every day, and I was like, this is, I know why they did it. They couldn't park it inside, and they wanted to protect it. But this I just kept thinking how people are normalizing this, but it was such a strange image. And the idea of like keeping something safe, keeping it away. And so I decided I wanted to do that with a hearse. And so this piece kind of came out of it. So I had done, part of my very early body of work was I collected baby strollers from the street, right? And so I didn't want to show that because I showed so many times, but it took me about 4 months to collect 365 abandoned baby strollers. And I guess I always wanted to do that sort of beginning of a journey of life. And I always wanted to think about like the end, right? And the hearse sort of became that form, that machine that I wanted to figure out how to do something. So putting death in a cage, putting fear in a cage, like all of those things was what I was considering. And the title is called Peacekeeper for a reason. Like what's kind of above the top are mufflers. And the muffler is what silences the car from making noise. Like this idea of like quieting something. So there was an element of dialogue with the genocide for me. It was a kind of reaction to, at the time, there was, this is during Clinton's administration, there was the Bosnian genocide and the Rwandan genocide that we were kind of normalizing. We would see all these and hear all these stories, and we kind of normalized it, and just thinking about that sense of loss. And so this one is very, in a way, I wanted to show this detail because in the first iteration, so I got a chance to do this twice. I did it for the Whitney Biennial, I think it was, in 1995, and then I was able to recreate it in 2020, for an exhibition called Grief and Grievance that was done at the New Museum. It was a kind of exhibition that was done in honoring of Okwi Enmezor. And Okwi really wanted this piece in the show, and so we brought it back. And in the first iteration, I covered the hearse with dove feathers, right? And it was kind of, nobody knew, because the dove feathers sort of leaked into what's on the hearse now, actually, sorry, let me go back. What's on the hearse now is grease. And so the dove feathers would just get absorbed with the grease, and it just looked like thick grease. But in this case, I decided to sort of, bless you, I decided to sort of transform that and add peacock feathers. And I felt like that really, for me, took it visually to another level. And something I didn't expect was that they started very much looking like eyes, right? That wasn't why I chose it, but that's what ended up happening. So this idea of witnessing became kind of reiterated through the feathers itself. So I wanted to just show this. So during the pandemic, I was really seeing a lot of street memorials, right? And what's kind of, I think, for me, really intriguing about these is that it's almost the same, always the same things. It's the prayer candles and alcohol bottles. 90% of them have these two elements. And during COVID, the funeral homes are closed. People weren't able to gather, but there were all of these street memorials that were set up for people who were lost. And so I wanted to figure out how to do something with that, to take, to sort of memorialize this in some way. So I guess I sort of mentioned that part of my life is looking at a street, and part of it is being engaged with art history. And so I couldn't help but seeing these bottles and thinking about Giorgio Morandi, right? And his kind of insistent repetition of, in his still lives, of painting bottles. Almost like this kind of searching for the bottles to evoke maybe a kind of spiritual presence. And so I really wanted to figure out how to bring a kind of Morandi dialogue with this street memorial conversation. And so this Still Lives of Stepladder piece became just that. So what it is these bottles that I collected, some of them from street memorials after they were disbanded, and also prayer candles. Then there are these ladders that are in the middle that are actually kind of cemented up, so you can't go up. The one thing that I wanted to bring up in terms of material is this cloth, this dark cloth that you're seeing. Let me go show a detail of it. It's called barrier cloth. And it's a cloth that is used in landscaping to separate poor soil from much richer, fertile soil. Because it allows for the water to go through, right? But you kind of keep that separation. So all of these elements are sort of coated with this barrier cloth. The formation of the prayer candles would take this shape. This is an earlier body of work that I use, which is coming from this church in Savannah, Georgia, these breathing holes rather. And the breathing holes I came across in this, like I said, in this church, this First Baptist church in Savannah, Georgia. And it was used as the site of the Underground Railroad. So on the ground floor of the church that was built by enslaved people, there were patterns of these, I think maybe 26 or so of these drilled holes. And come to find out, they think that they were used as ventilation holes for enslaved individuals to hide in the day and escape at night. So I was really intrigued with this symbol of resistance, because it's a Congolese cosmogram. And I'm sure the slave master just saw it as a cross. And this sort of idea of this thing hiding in plain sight, this is part of their history, hiding in plain sight, but really meant a lot. And I think I was intrigued with the fact that it's a kind of a merger or a combination of the cross and this important symbol. So it's basically the horizon line, sunrise, sunset. So it's a cycle of life. It's death and rebirth, all in one symbol, similar to the cross itself. So within the Still Lives stepladders, there are a configuration of these. And then in the installation, there were these panels that also sort of echoed that. I'll show a detail of it. The sidewalk, this sort of sidewalk version. For me, what was important is this kind of copper scoring, this copper etching, was sort of the idea of bringing light back into it, right? Like the prayer candles, and this notion of gathering was a really important part of thinking about this memorial piece. The fact that it's not a church, it's a kind of nondescript space that it somehow becomes relevant because people are gathering and being together in this reflection of loss was really important. So I think I also wanted to just talk a little bit about, I think this spiritual, which is kind of the weird thing to try to pin down, but I always think about this search for the spiritual, and you think about it spiritually when you reflect on something maybe religious, maybe something in the landscape, something that's sublime. But I think it really becomes about a kind of acknowledgement of multiplicity of time, right? The kind of conflation of time that we contemplate and internalize. So I really think about spirituality as this kind of dialogue with time. And so I'm always trying to figure out how that can happen with material, and using something recognizable, then fracturing the time that's around it, that surrounds it, that it allows for in terms of realizing it, is really the challenge. There's this one really, and I'm going to kill the quote, but it's I'm going to paraphrase it, of Jimmy Durham. And Jimmy Durham has this quote where he says, we live our lives in the past, but we echo and reverberate in the present. And I always thought that was really interesting because it makes sense. Like everything that we deal with is really based on our memory, right? That's how we function. And futurity, the future, is really maybe even utopia is considered this idea of the future because it's inaccessible, right? It's something within the imagination. But this notion of being in the present through reverberation and echo is what I feel like. If there was a title for this talk, it would be Reverberation and Echo, because I feel like that's what the work is. Like all of these works are about this idea of like trying to contend with the now, but acknowledging the past. Because your recognition of that thing, whether it's a shoelace or a baby stroller, that's your past. And how do you, as an artist, I'm trying to cancel that for a quick moment with the craft so that some other moment of the present can happen. That echo and reverberation is what I'm asking for within the crafting of this, this object. So I wanted to just finish with this piece. I was invited to do a project in Milan at this massive pool, a Roman-era built pool in dedication of Guido Romano, who was World War I, sort of fascist era, right? So it was a World War I kind of hero. And it's still there, and it's still named after Guido Romano. So it's, fascism still is living. So the idea was to figure out what could memorialize the space in a different way and sort of take it on. That was the plaque that still celebrates Guido Romano. So what I really wanted to do is, at the time, there was this dialogue about, in any European country, I think it's a dialogue about immigration, right? And people trying to leave their dire straits of situation and to come to a better life, like anybody would. And so, and the risk they take in doing that. And I think there was this one incident going across the Mediterranean where quite a few, refugees have died and still happening. So I really wanted to think about this situation, but navigate it with this project. So this was what I wanted to use. These were, it's kind of interesting because the material is used for crisis. The project's called Emergence Pooled. And this material is used for crisis, right? It's when somebody falls in the water and they need to get their body heat back. And so this is, but it's also used in exercising, right? These blankets. And so I was really intrigued with the double use of that. And the fact that this individual was a gold medalist. So I wanted to sort of cover the pool with this material. So this is kind of what the pool, and this is kind of precarious memorial in a way. And what's going on the right side is this object. It's a piece that it's actually a police light system that I reconfigured to become a sound piece. So we recorded immigrants to talk about their homes or their memories of homes or things that remind them of home. And so this is kind of the soundtrack to the pool piece. You can kind of see it on the right-hand side there. So this is the last piece. So any questions, let me know if you. Okay. Thank you. So does anybody have any questions, comments?
Just raise your hand. We have time for a couple of questions.
So I was really intrigued by your work. I thought it was, amazing. My question, what happens to the larger pieces after they display? Like, where do they go? Is it acquired by the art institution that shows it, or do you have to store it somewhere? Those are my questions.
Yeah, that's a great question. I always, this is a big problem for sculptors, not necessarily for painters. So, I think this piece, I try to collect the materials and reuse them. And a lot of times the work gets cannibalized. And sometimes I try to think about that. For instance, the very first piece that I did that was massive was the Amazing Grace piece, right? And this piece was, like I said, it's 365 baby strollers. I needed to do it, but then after the question is what's going to happen to it. But I also had my plan B, right? Like I was thinking, well, perhaps worst case scenario, I could think about a smaller version of the piece, right? I was fortunate enough that I didn't have to think that way. Somebody purchased it. But either I decide to cannibalize and reuse it, or I have, I have very high storage cost. So it's like child support payments that I have. Yeah, it really is. I just take care of it,
Okay. Hi. Can you hear me? Okay, cool. So I kind of wrote it down, but not really. So from what I understand, you grew up Baptist, but you're currently not practicing. But I'm wondering, within your performance, particularly, do you, because we're talking about spirituality, right? And that's what's happening. Do you in your spiritual, whatever spiritual practice it is, whatever iteration of Baptist roots it is, do you feel like you catch the Holy Ghost while you are performing? I'm really curious about that.
No, I think you kind of go into another zone. I don't know if it's the Holy Ghost. I do zone in on the engagement with the moment, and I think that maybe that's something about the Holy Ghost. But yeah, that kind of connecting to a moment and just kind of isolating it, sort of when I'm doing the Crusader or the Pushing Savior, it really is about that. Nothing else exists but that activity, So it's funny, there's this Nestor Topsy show that's really amazing show that's up. Oh, Nestor, great, beautiful show, thank you. And I was telling Michelle when I saw the show, and I really love it, that I as a student, we were forced to take icon painting. And I always thought that the reason why we were forced is that this teacher was tenured, and they had to fill his class, right? So we all begrudgingly took this class, but it's one of the best classes I had to take, because that whole idea of connecting, and I see that in Nestor's work, connecting to the material and connecting to yourself while you're with the material, is really that meditation on making and the gesture of repetition. All of those things kind of brings you to another, I want to say devotional, but, and then that devotional is maybe more about connecting with self, So I do feel like anything that brings that is generative in that way. And even for me, that weaving and knotting and tying, those repetitious action, I kind of go into a space of self that's really important for making the work and for the work to exist.
Thanks. I was wondering, can you tell us the background to the piece that's here in the museum?
Oh, yeah, great. Oh, I didn't, you noticed I left that out, right? So I think the first slide you saw was me as a night guardman, right? So the world of security tags was really a memory piece in that way as well. but I was really intrigued with what, something that's overly secured, and what ends up happening to it, right? Like, so for me, without killing the reading of the piece, because I don't want to, my interpretation of it is not the end result, it's just one interpretation. But I always talked about the complication of the symbol itself and the power of it. And I was really, I think I was reacting to the Trump presidency, right? And as an immigrant, I always felt like what America offered was this notion of hope globally, right? And so the tapping down of that was really problematic for me. And so I wanted to have a work that had a conversation with that, this idea of control and what happens when you control something so much that you lose sight of what it is. And I think that the piece kind of allows for that to be considered.
Thank you so much, Nari.
Oh, great, Nari, thank you. Thank you, guys, I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for coming. Thank you, Nari, for a wonderful talk. And enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.